This is our utility room. Now it's going to be very difficult for me to show you this room in all its glory because it's tiny. Now we always wanted a utility room, but as you can see from the mess, we're not exactly utilising the space very well. In this video, we're going to transform that. I plan to build a countertop and work surface around the freezer and the washing machine, and then some shelving on top, and some way of boxing in this brand new consumer unit that we had put in the other week. It's a much better and safer consumer unit than the burnt out one we had before, but it's ugly. And we need to figure out what to do about the whole drying my colourful socks.
Any project requires you to start by gathering your materials. I've ordered in some sheets of ply and some sheets of MDF, but as you can see, it is a bit of a struggle in a tight space with just me on my own, with, the post-Christmas fitness levels. First step is to cut my materials down to a more manageable size. I'm cutting everything a little oversized here because there is going to be some scribing that needs doing, and I just need it to be a manageable enough length and width to go through my table saw. When I say a more manageable size to go through the table saw, the main reason is, although the table saw looks like I could open the garage and slide full sheets through, it's not quite centered enough, so that is not an option. Plus, it's also a bit ropey doing 18mm ply on your own. Perhaps if I was a little stronger and not as full of cheese and wine, it would be easier. But it's not possible at present. The three panels that I'm cutting at the minute are going to be the uprights, the dividers between the washing machine and the fridge freezer. I'm also doing an extra one because I'd like a little cubby hole to cover the mains inlet for the water. I need to be able to get to the stopcock to turn it off in case of emergency. In terms of measurements, I'm sticking with a standard kitchen carcass measurement of 600 deep, so 600 away from the wall. This seems a little small for something as big as a washing machine and a fridge freezer, but I'm sticking to the standard measurements because I want to make sure the freezer door can open properly and it has a bit of consistency with the kitchen next door. To allow room for the various pipes, so the waste pipe and the water inlet and the electrical cable for the washing machine, I'm cutting out this recess from the back. It's probably oversized but will give me plenty of space to work with. Now the plug sockets aren't in an ideal place within this room. Had I known where everything was going to sit when I redid the walls, I'd have put them in a better place. But the reality is, the electrics have got to be fed in through the side. There is no plug socket behind either of these units. So I'm going to drill a hole that I know the plug will fit through so that all of the electrics can come out, and it makes sure that everything is tidy-ish without me having to get an electrician in to move all the plug sockets again. Because I'm tight and because I didn't want to wait to order edge banding and for it to arrive, I decided that I would fill the face edge of this, the one that's going to be seen, with some wood filler. Now this plywood is not perfect, it's not the best grade and there are some little voids. I didn't want to see that when I painted over it, so I just slathered on a ton of wood filler, and I'm hoping that if I do that a couple of times and sand it back, then it will paint up quite nicely. The next step was cutting up some battens from scrap wood. Now the battens are going to provide a little bit of rigidity, structure, and overall make the assembly a little easier to do because the battens will give me my spacings without having to use a tape measure. Now this is not an ideal scenario. I know from designing our kitchen that you are not supposed to have two sets of electronics like a fridge freezer and a dishwasher or washing machine right next to each other. There should be a fully assembled carcass in between each thing to provide that vertical support. However, we haven't got that option in this setup, so I'm working with what I've got, and it may look a bit unsafe, and feel free to comment because I know it will irk some people, but this voiceover is actually happening after a couple of weeks of the project being finished, and nothing has collapsed. Yet. So far. Maybe soon. Next up, I needed a countertop. Now, here's the thing that's going to generate even more comments. And remember, give me your negative comments. Negative comments are better than no comments. I'm cutting up more plywood for the countertop. Now I know what you're thinking. Plywood countertop, that's going to look ugly. I agree. I completely agree. I wanted to order a kitchen worktop. However, the wife asked me to do this project on a budget. I'm trying to keep it under 250 quid. If I wanted a kitchen counter worktop, that would double the budget to £500. So we're going to have a plywood countertop at the wife's request. Please just bear with me. I promise it ends up looking better than you think it will do. To make sure this fits snugly, I needed to do a little bit of scribing. Now I've cut this slightly oversized because I'm going to have to take off some material at the back. These walls are actually pretty square compared to the rest of the house, so there wasn't too much material to take off, which was fortunate, because that meant I could achieve it all with just using a belt sander. Now the idea is that I've kept my scribe line very close to the wall, and I'm just going to use the belt sander to take off the majority of the material. The trick to this is to angle the belt sander slightly so that the top part of your countertop, or the top of your countertop, is the sanding line. But you are angling that belt sander down so that it will fit flush, so that the bottom will perhaps be a millimetre inset from the top. I hope that made sense. It sounded alright in my head. To try and up-level the plywood just a touch, I rounded over the corners and the edges. I did the corners using a jigsaw pretty much by eye, and then just went over it with a round over bit. Now, here's something that I've learned. The better the grade of plywood, the cleaner the round over you are able to do. It's to do with the lamination. If the lamination isn't strong and you do a round over, then when you go to sand that round over, you realise that, oh, this little chip here hasn't got much glue under it. So you've got to work with what you've got, and I'm trying to do it on the cheap here. I'm trying to employ my Keith Brown approach. Sometimes good enough is good enough, and this is a utility room. And once I got over my fears of using a plywood top as the countertop, well, I actually quite enjoyed the process. You get a product quite quickly, and I actually think it looks alright in the end. This next part is a little niche and probably wouldn't feature in most people's utility rooms. Because we live in Lincolnshire and we have one of the top 3 worst water providers in the country, we have a reverse osmosis water filter, which is great. It makes the water safe to drink. Because apparently the water that comes out your tap, it ain't great in our part of the country. So I'm making a hole here, and that's got to fit a bowl in. I asked the wife to pick up a bowl that would catch any drips from the tap. It doesn't need to be a plumbed sink. So the wife went to Pets at Home and picked up a rabbit bowl. So this is a custom size hole for a rabbit food bowl, obviously. I did drill another hole using a Forstner bit for the tap itself to fit into and to plumb from underneath, but after that, in about an hour, I've made a countertop. All unpainted wood in our house gets the same finishing treatment. That means that even though the decoration in each room is slightly different, there is a little bit of a theme going through the house. So I'm using the natural oak stain here. It's actually a dye. It's from Little Fairs. There's a link in the description if you want to use it, but it's really, really simple. You brush it on quite sparingly, try not to put too much on as it will stain, so you need to maintain a wet edge, I believe they call it. But once you've wiped it on, you leave it to dry, and then you can put on whatever finish you like. Because it's a dye, you can use any type of finish at all. So whilst that was in the garage at -3, while I was hoping it would dry rather than freeze, I came in, put some shorts on and began priming the rest of the counter cabinet sides, whatever I'm calling this, the vertical supports. Now I'm being a bit lazy here, as you can see. I'm not actually painting all of it. A lot of this will never be seen. I'm using Leyland's acrylic primer undercoat. I've used a lot of different primers and a lot of different paints, some with success, some not. My office build, for example, I used Valspar paint. It's supposed to have a built-in primer and I'm not pleased with how it's holding up. This, for me, is the best paint finish I've found so far. An acrylic primer undercoat, 2 coats of that, de-nibbing, or basically sanding very lightly in between, and you get a beautiful surface, and it's so durable, you can scratch it and it's safe. And by the time I'd finished priming all the cabinets inside, I could go back out to the garage to apply the varnish. Again, I'm using a Little Fairs product here. It's an extra strong matte varnish. This one takes a little bit more care to put on. You have to put it on in the direction of the grain, and the best way I've found of doing this is to get it all on and then put on a head torch and then shine the head torch, and it'll allow you to see where you've perhaps not gone with the grain or where you've missed a spot. But other than that, you put it all on, you leave it to dry, and then again, like the primer, light sand in between coats. I put 2 coats of varnish on this and it's made it completely waterproof. So with the varnish drying, it was shorts and t-shirt back on, the log burner cranking, and time to apply the first coat of paint. The wife and I went to the paint shop and we were very decisive. We chose this colour and walked away with the paint within 5 minutes, which is pretty impressive for us. In case you're wondering, I'm using Johnston's Aqua Water Based Satin. Now this stuff has supposedly got oil paint style properties, but goes well with the acrylic primer, so the lady in the shop said. In case you're wondering, it is a tabby green or a tabby brown, I think. It looks a different colour when it dries, which I was pleased about because it looked a little grey when I put it on. But I must say the finish is excellent. It does seem very durable and it dries very evenly. Here you can see the batten work at the back. Now those battens at the back will provide some support for the countertop, but they also space apart the panels. I also used pocket holes to add a couple of extra supports just to keep the distance square, but as you can see there's still a little bit of wiggle. Once I was happy that everything was level, I then secured them to the wall at the back. Now to do this I used some angle iron and basically put them into the studs where possible. There was one panel where I didn't quite manage to line it up with the stud, and for that I just had to put in some plasterboard roll plugs. And with everything secure and in place, I could install the countertop, which was as simple as sticking it on top, and I later came through and secured it from underneath. Because of all of the support battens, I could screw straight through the battens and secure the worktop from underneath.
Don't tell the wife, but I actually quite like the plywood. I like that it's a bit dinged up and rough and rugged. And to be fair, a good chunk of it's going to be covered up at the back anyway, but if she don't watch my videos, don't tell her. Not that you'd be able to tell her because you don't know where we live, and I hope you don't know where we live anyway, because that would be scary.
And this is what it looks like with everything in place. I'm really pleased with the colour, really pleased with the sheen of the paint that matches the sheen of the countertop. More than anything, I'm just happy with it looking tidy. I didn't have time to sit around and pat myself on the back though. I had to crack on with the top half of the project. This is just going to be a set of shelves and a cabinet to hide that electric consumer unit. I've chosen to use MDF for this. Now, I was going to use MDF for the whole project. However, when we empty the filter on the washing machine, it can cause quite a lot of water to leak out all over the place. Same when you defrost the freezer. Now, plywood, because it's half glue and half wood, can suffer a bit of water damage a lot better than MDF can. So I panicked and used ply for the bottom, but I do want to push myself to try MDF for the top because I've heard it takes paint very well. This is actually my first time using MDF. The process was much the same as the bottom half. I cut everything to a rough height and then I ran it through the table saw. Now the shelving unit is not going to come out as far as the cabinets. So the cabinets came out 600, the shelving is going to come out about 330mm. The reason it's going to come out that much is because we're putting baskets on apparently, and that will fit the baskets. For me, the worst thing about working with MDF is the dust. Now even when I put dust extraction on my table saw, the dust particles floating through the air was ridiculous. What doesn't help is I've lost the pack of nose pads for my mask, so therefore I'm steaming my glasses up at the same time. I either need to order some more, or maybe clean the garage a little bit. That might help. I'd left the panel slightly above that 330 depth, purely because I knew I'd need to scribe. Now these three panels were essentially like the story of Goldilocks. One needed no scribing, one needed a touch, and one pretty much had a corner cut out of it. The panel you see on the screen is like Papa Bear's porridge. This one needed a lot of it. Now I didn't get annoyed and cut that chunk out in the bottom of your screen. That's for cabling that comes through from an armoured cable outside. Basically allows me to work in the garage. I'm using the belt sander again to creep up on that line. Yes, this is a slow process, and yes, I could have used the jigsaw. However, I wasn't getting good results when I used the jigsaw with the MDF first time round. It's not like working with real wood. You can't just sneak up on it. It tended just to chew it up and make a bit of a jagged mess. You'll notice that I stopped sanding before I reached the line in that last clip, and I did that on each one. Yes, it requires you to go back and forth, but as you can see here, the gap at the top is still slightly bigger than I'd like it. So actually, my scribe line was no longer accurate. I'd recommend doing this. It's much more time intensive, but it's the best result you can get. I'm also drilling another access hole in one of the side panels for a plug to fit through. Again, the socket placement in the room isn't ideal. We do run a dehumidifier in this room for drying washing, so we need to be able to plug it in somewhere. With the vertical pieces all cut and scribed nicely, it was time for the horizontal pieces. Now these are going to be the fixed panels that span horizontally between the vertical ones. There is going to be some floating shelves as well that are going to sit on pins, but these are going to provide the structure and keep everything nice and strong. I'm planning on joining these to the vertical columns using rebates. So if you've got a width of say 600mm, I made sure that these were cut to 610mm so that you've got a 5mm rebate on each side. I would have liked a deeper rebate, but the middle panel has got to take two rebates at exactly the same height. That means if you've got a 5mm rebate on each side, that only leaves 8mm of material, so I couldn't really go for any longer. Every time I come to use rebated joints, I kick myself for having not made a jig the previous time. I always seem to use rebates with 18mm material, and yet I always have to set up like this. Basically mark the rebate line, measure, I believe it's 36mm from that line, and then set up a stop block for my router to run against. I have to do that measurement twice per rebate, and when you've got 10 of them to do, that ends up being a lot of faffing. So my pro tip here is just make a jig that you can whack on top of any board. With all of the rebates cut, yes, I did lose some of the footage, hence why you didn't see much of it. It was time to sand down all of the boards before assembly. You'll notice some smaller, thinner panels off to the right hand side of your screen. Those are the nailing strips that are going to sit under each shelf. So not only will they support the shelf, they will also attach to the wall and help to take the weight of some of the project and stop it from tipping forward. Although this is going to be so snug to the roof that there isn't much chance of that. Those nailing strips are going to be held in place with pocket hole screws. They're going to be on the back, so they're not going to be visible. I've got to get inventive with the fixing and the gluing up. I'm going to glue this unit up in two sections. That'll help me to keep it square, but also as one big unit, it's just impossible to get clamps on it. One thing I hadn't accounted for was because of the scribing that I did to make everything flush to the wall, that meant that everything didn't quite line up straight on the back. However, I made sure that those nailing strips were straight between the scribed boards, and then I could just use my flush trim bit in my router to bring everything to the right level. That means that even the shelves are scribed to the bow of the wall. In theory. And then with the unit flipped over on the front, there was a little bit of sanding work to do. I was really pleased with how well the rebated joins lined up, but there was a bit of glue squeeze out and a couple of points where the pocket holes pulled everything out of square. The beauty of MDF is that it does sand and you can get a very consistent finish with it. So a little bit of time with the sander and I could bring that right down. Before I could get this thing painted, there were a couple of little finishing touches to do. I just by hand sanded and rounded over the corners. Now I want a square boxy look, but I don't want them to be sharp because that's the thing that gets caught and then chips your paintwork away. And then anywhere where my rebates were slightly less than perfect, I just threw some filler in there. Again, this is going to be paint grade, so I can get away with little things like that. And it was only at the back that this joint had opened up. All the way through it seemed fine. Whilst that filler was drying, I had more MDF to cut. Yes, I was not finished yet. The consumer unit needs to be hidden by a door, and then also to cover the pipe work and the water mains inlet, I needed a little door as well. That was simple enough, 2 rectangular pieces of MDF. Even I can cut that. The consumer unit door is going to be on some hidden flush hinges, so there's no prep work needed for that. The door, however, is going to be on Euro-style cabinet hinges, so I need to use a Forstner bit to make sure that there is an indent so that they can sit in. Here you're witnessing me using the wrong size of Forstner bit, but I've got a helpful tip that comes out of this. If you get the correct size of Forstner bit and drill through a piece of scrap wood, you can then overlay that onto the mistake hole, and then that lines everything up. It's basically like a drill guide for Forstner bits. There was one more piece of wood that I did need to cut, and this was a bit of an oversight. Those sprung hinges I'm using for the top cabinet need something more substantial than the MDF to screw into. So you're not going to see this piece of wood, but it will add a bit of extra support for those hinges.
Welcome to my spray booth, as in the disused garden room. I'm allowed to get paint anywhere I want in this room because we're ripping it all out. So I've got things hanging from the ceiling. I've got a relatively cleanish area. I've got a diesel heater right there, ready to crank because it is currently -2. And I got a new spray gun. Exciting times.
Exciting times, or not. This ended up being a huge disappointment. I could not, for the life of me, get the spray gun to spray evenly. I watered down the paint to the point where it was more water than paint, and I still wasn't happy with the result. Yes, I couldn't get on with the paint sprayer. Probably user error, so if anybody knows what I'm doing wrong, I am using an acrylic based primer that is very thick, but I watered it down about 20% and I didn't dare go any more watery than that because it's MDF. So if you know what I've done wrong, whack it in the comments. I love rolling. I don't. I hate it. But once I had it all done, it was time to go back and give everything a light sand. Now the room I'm in at the minute, when we bought the house, was one of the main selling points. It's a lovely garden room, but it was in a bit of a dire state when we saw it. It had a massive hot tub in there, which again, that's the selling point. Turns out after a couple of months, hot tub exploded and leaked water everywhere. This room is badly water damaged, as you might be able to see from the skirting in some of the pictures. All of the bifold doors are blown and they are hanging off. When it's windy, they sometimes come off and tend to have to be strapped and nailed into place. The plan for the future is to refurbish this room, but it will involve more than just joinery. There'll be some framework, there'll be some hanging doors, plasterwork. If you're interested in seeing that, I know it's not strictly woodworking, then please let me know in the comments. And if you really don't want to see it and think that would be a stupid thing to put on this channel, then tell me. Otherwise, it might just end up on there. As is with this project, it is do one job, and while you're waiting for that, don't waste your time, get on to the next job. So whilst my second coat of primer was drying, I came back out into the garage and then cut up some more plywood. This plywood's going to be for the floating shelves, the ones that are going to sit on pins. This is going to be stained to add a bit of contrast, the same colour as the countertop. That way there will be a mixture of paint and natural-ish looking wood throughout. So the wife bought a new iron the other day because our old one may have had a bit of glue on from the last time I did edge banding. Don't tell her that its first voyage is going to be edge banding. And yes, I know the banding's going the wrong way with the grain on the board. But I'm trying to save some cash and not break into another piece of plywood. Yes, I still haven't got one of those fancy edge band trimmers. What I have though is a sharpened chisel. And to be honest, I find it as easy and as smooth doing the sharpened chisel, and I also like to challenge myself to see how long a strand I can make. Yes, I realise I'm not doing a very good job here, but a sharpened chisel does the job eventually. With the temperature hitting -6, even the diesel heater in the garden room was not enough for paint to be drying. So, with the help of the wife, we moved the entire unit back into the kitchen where I could give it the final coats of paint. When you buy a flat pack kitchen, the pilot holes for the hardware are already drilled. Because I built this myself, I have to do it myself. The best way I've found to make sure that they are nice and square is to use a square. It's not a perfect solution, but the squarer you can get these hinges, the less adjustment you have to do afterwards. So I'm pre-installing the hinges here because I'm going to be working in a very tight space when I come to hang this door. I've also cut out an extra panel that I'm going to glue to the wall because I can't get any screws in there, and that's what this is going to attach to. For the top mounted cabinet drawer, I've got some of these sprung hinges. I got these from B&Q and they were rated to a much greater weight than this door is, and yet they are still not brilliant. I'd recommend having some of the side mounted brackets with the arms. They look like little hydraulic arms and I'm sure they would support the weight better. This is fine because it's going on a door that is barely ever going to be used unless we have a power cut, so I'm not too fussed, but I wouldn't use them again. To secure the handles, I do have a cabinet handle jig from when I did the kitchen. This makes life very, very easy. You line it up with a centre mark and you line it up with the width of the handle. You drill through the mounting holes and it's as simple as that. You get a perfectly centred, perfectly distanced handle very easily. And just as a little spoiler, you'll notice my unfinished stairs and bits of carpet hanging around in the background. That is an upcoming project and one that I am very excited about, whilst also petrified. I chose to mount that top cabinet door before we installed the unit because it's going to be really difficult to access once that unit is in place. But once that was installed, this thing was ready to lift.
Joe, I've been working on that spot. Look at that.
Look how nice that is.
It fits just under there as well, under there. We're going to have to touch it. That's really smart.
That was the tightest measurement I had. I allowed 5 mil and that's not 5 mil, so I'm glad that's gone well. Look at my scribing to the wall. I am wonderful!
Gets the wife's seal of approval. It's the most important thing.
It absolutely is, because this was the wife's project. This is what she wanted, and this is what the wife gets. My final job was to drill some holes for the shelf pins, and I did this by using a little jig. Now, I had a scrap piece of MDF, and I would always recommend using a jig for something like this. It's so much easier than getting out a measuring tape, keeps everything consistent, and means that you are drilling the pins in straight because you have drilled straight holes through that jig. And with the shelf pins in place and the shelves sliding beautifully into those slots, this project was complete. Apart from touching up the paintwork and doing some other little random jobs to make the room look pretty. Oh, and screwing it to the stud work as well, which I haven't done yet. Anyway, you'll see all those in the final shots. And here she is, the finished product. I could not be happier with how this has turned out, despite the frustrations doing it. Working in this small space, trying to get paint to dry in sub-zero conditions, trying to navigate all of this around the busy Christmas period, doing it for an hour or so on an evening or a couple of hours on the weekend. This one has been difficult and frustrating, but I think this is hands down the most professional looking thing that I've built to date. Really pleased with it. Hope you love it.
Thank you so much for your time watching this video, and I can only apologise for the amount of time it's been since the last video. I promise to be better this year. I'm so pleased with how this has turned out. I could not be happier, and even the wife is pleased with it. If you want to see any more content, check the screens either side. Take care. Cheers.